maybe 2 minutes delay on getting started with this talent talk. Can you hear me twice, John, or just once?
Oh, I can only hear you once, Adam.
Okay, good. I can hear myself twice. Anyway, right. We're here with John Wallace, Head of Resourcing, Big Banks, another company. Also esteemed author of Higher Power. Bad echo. If you switch off this, yeah, I'm getting a bad echo. Okay. Let's see. Is that better? Seems to be. Can you hear me? Yay! Thank you, everybody. Okay, wonderful. Right, so esteemed recruitment author. John, you can't hear me now, can you?
Yes, I can hear you now, Adam.
Okay. Yeah, but the echo's back. If you switch the sound off your side, let's talk on the phone. Somebody's saying I think John needs headphones. Tell the guest to put a headset on. I'll tell you what, maybe that'll help. Thanks for all this wonderful advice. Just as well, we've got such savvy people that always dial into this show. Let's see if this helps. And imagine that, advice from Recruiting Animal, the world's most famous recruitment broadcaster.
Okay, does that work?
Well, yeah, could be much better. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you okay, Adam.
Let's go. So, okay, esteemed recruitment author John Wallace, tell us, last time you were on our talent talk back in beginning of December, your book was like top of the charts or something like that. Tell us how it's all been going since.
It was second in the charts, and that's as good as we reached. It's it goes up and down, but we've stayed in the top 25,000 sellers on Amazon for the entire time. Which, given they've got 6 million copies, I'm going to take that as pretty good. Or 6 million different titles, I'm going to take that as pretty good. So I'm not threatening J.K. Rowling, but what's really nice is a lot of people have sent me emails and messages on LinkedIn and what have you, saying they've read it and they've enjoyed it, which is a good thing. So that I'm quite pleased with the way it's going.
Right. So hopefully you mean top 25,000 books on Amazon in total, rather than top 25,000 Amazon books about recruiting.
Top 25,000 books on Amazon about recruitment from someone in Midlothian. Yes, I've managed to.
Yeah, okay. So you're top of the Midlothian chart. Sure.
I'm pretty high. Yeah. No, top 25,000 of all Amazon books. So it kind of hovers about in a chart there somewhere.
And what sort of stuff when you're putting together a book? Tell us about what sort of stuff do you do to get people interested? Because I know you were on Matt Alder's podcast, and what else have you been doing to talk about Higher Power?
Well, I speak at a few things, do things like this. The podcast was actually really good. The podcast with Matt. I mean, I'd listened to a lot of Matt's podcasts before, which I really enjoyed, and we've had a really tremendous response to that. And I can see a direct correlation between book sales and, Matt updates me with how many listens we've had to the podcast and things like that. So it is just about getting the word out. I mean, quite clearly, the way that I would like the book to progress is more of word of mouth. I've had some people buy copies and use them as presents to hand out to their staff in recruitment companies and things like that. And obviously what you want is that word of mouth, people saying there's actually some sense in this. Of course, if there isn't any sense in it, then that's up to them. And it's been reviewed in a couple of publications as well. Had it reviewed on exec appointments at ft.com. and in the HR Insider magazine here in Scotland. So, and they both said nice things about it. So that's good. That is good. So it's coming along.
Yeah. So Audra's commented that Matt Alder's podcast is great, and she got 120 LinkedIn connection requests afterwards. Did you have the book, Joe, is called Higher Power, HIRE, Higher Power, like kind of a play on God, sort of.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
John, did you get 120 LinkedIn connection requests after Matt's podcast?
Yeah, I think it would probably be. So I haven't counted them up, but they come in. There seems to be 3 or 4 every single day afterwards, which is always quite good. And then that's just more people sort of in the network to spread good things. Yeah.
Yeah. Animal says if you come on his show, you get people who like kittens following him on Twitter. I think you get people who like killing kittens following you on Twitter if you go on his show. That's what I've found.
Yeah. Well, okay. Don't know what to say to that. I need to kill kittens, not own a kitten.
So, okay, let's talk a bit more about like internationally, because this is quite interesting. Your experience my personal view is that the UK is a very sophisticated market when it comes to recruitment. I think it's probably the most sophisticated in the world. And I think the kind of North American market is probably pretty sophisticated as well. Tell me, where are you getting the most interest from in terms of higher power? And what trends have you seen?
Well, I've seen some interest in the UK primarily, of course, which is a good thing. But also recently I've been asked to do an event which I'm doing tomorrow with an Indian audience, which I'm really excited about. I'm doing a tweet chat, which is I type and answer questions quickly in real time, which will test my technical ability to its very limits. So having some interest in India as well is quite good, and I've had some interest in the US, and I can see in the sales that there is some international sales, which is a nice thing. But I'm not buying the Barbados beach house on the back of the book. So
yeah. So India is probably like India is a massive country, and I think that countries like India do look to people who are in, say, the UK and places like that for best practice around things like recruiting.
Well, that would reflect my experience in the Middle East, because not only was it my experience in the Middle East when I went there, but also a lot of the other recruitment leaders in a lot of businesses. And this would be, I was in Bahrain, but it would be right across the Emirates as well, in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. You would see a lot of expats, a lot of UK particular expats leading resourcing functions out there. And that is because I guess we can bring perhaps a bit more experience of the market and the evolution of recruitment markets from the UK and take them into the markets that are really emerging now. So yeah, I think it's a definite trend, and it's a really interesting area as well.
Yeah. Tell me about China. Is that a country that you've had any kind of experience with? I know that you've worked internationally. Is that a country you've had any experience with? Is it a country that you've spoken to anybody about higher power?
No, it's not, but I'd like to, because there's lots of them. And it's a massive market, and I reckon that the Chinese recruitment experience, because of the way that the economy is an absolute boom at the minute, I suspect that there is a need there for people to address resourcing in a really professional way for lots of varying reasons. I mean, they'll need to get in really high-tech skills. They'll have a massively highly educated population for a lot of these high-tech skills as well. So I think it's a very exciting market for anybody in recruitment.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one that could be quite interesting might be Australia. Again, like I see businesses. We've created an Asia Pacific advisory board. There's about I think there's 8 people, and I think 7 of them are Brits in Australia. It just seems to be that the Australian recruitment market is thriving, and there's a lot of great recruitment tech businesses there as well. That's another one that could be a good market for a higher power for sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the subject for the subject for this show, which is to do with culture.
Yes.
I know this is something you're particularly interested in. You've done a lot of study around this. You got a lot of personal experience in it as well. So, I mean, just start from the very beginning. Let's start at the very top. What sort of a culture is going to, hone a really positive resourcing sort of environment?
Well, let's go back and sort of look at the reason why I think culture is important in the first place, and that was through when I was doing the research for the book, and also my own experience, and also I guess as much as anything through knowing a lot of senior people in the world of recruitment throughout the years, and having conversations with them, and we kind of all shared very similar experiences as to how recruitment was viewed in a lot of the businesses that we were in. I mean, I used to get a very strong feeling when I was working, say, in RBS, for example, that the HR director would want to talk to me when things were going horribly wrong somewhere and I had a problem to solve. But if I wanted to speak to the HR director or HR directors about something new and innovative that I wanted to do in recruitment, or a piece of technology that I wanted to buy or whatever, they were less warm to having that conversation. And the way that I understood it at the time was recruitment was very much treated as a transactional operational activity. We did stuff in recruitment. We had a requisition and we filled the requisition. We moved on to the next requisition and we filled that requisition. There was always a lot of silos, false or deliberately created, between what went on with the external recruitment people, the internal market. Temporary recruitment was handled over here by the line manager. Talent management, as in planned moves throughout the organization for highly talented people, was handled by a separate bunch of individuals as well. And we were all slightly disconnected from within the HR community, but from what actually the business plan was and the capability that would be required to build that business plan to meet the organization's long-term objectives. It always felt like we were always going off in our own kind of directions, doing what was very good strategic or very good tactical execution, but it wasn't part of an overall strategic plan. Yeah. So when I talk to peers and people in the industry about the culture within the organization, it's along that lines of more often than not, it is culture within the organization that doesn't take recruitment desperately seriously. Now, if I go back to what I talked about in the book, is why I talk about culture. I say there are 3 conditions that need to be in place for your business to really succeed in a resourcing sense. And by succeed, what I mean is not just fill the jobs, but actually deliver a resourcing plan that meets the long-term capability objectives of the organization. So you have a business with a 3 to 5 year plan, and you actually build a resourcing plan which involves all those elements of the resourcing mix that I've talked about, and could involve other elements of a resourcing mix, like outsourcing, for example, could be part of your resourcing mix. But you actually have made deliberate and conscious decisions to build a resourcing plan to meet the objectives of the business long term. So if that's what we're trying to do, what I saw and identified through conversations with people, my own experience, was that there's 3 things need to be in place. So there's 3 conditions, I call them. One was excellence in execution. One was long-term planning allied to that business planning process. And the third one was culture. Now, what I find is what we tend to focus on in conversations about recruitment, and if you look on LinkedIn, if you look absolutely anywhere, what you will see is lots of guidance and advice how to do that first bit, the excellent in execution. Absolutely right. But if you don't tie that to a plan that looks into the long-term future, you're just constantly using strategic tools to deliver tactical aims. But if the culture's not right, and that's the bit when I speak to people, they all go, yeah, that's the tough one to do. If the culture's not right, if recruitment isn't taken seriously, and I say that in horrible inverted commas, but if recruitment is just seen as an operation, as a task that needs to be done, as something that anybody can do, then that's always going to stand in your way of having the right planning or getting the right execution, if that makes sense. And I can bring that to life for you as well by describing, I guess, what a bad culture looks like. And there's some, when I say bad culture, that's perhaps the wrong phrase. A culture that doesn't enable that strategic resourcing is where the targets are the wrong thing. I mean, I've felt for a long time that there are pretty much three things we measure in recruitment. We measure time, we measure cost, and we measure the quality of hiring. But actually, the quality of hiring is the one that always struggles. The typical quality of hiring metrics that most organizations use are actually quite negative metrics, such as people who fail their probationary period or short-term tenure, which are really, that's setting the bar very, very low in quality, as opposed to some kind of measure that says, well, did John come in and was he actually able to contribute what he was meant to contribute to the long-term plan and the organization's objectives? The trouble with the other two measures, which are the ones that typically we focus on, and this is all based around human behavior, if you focus on driving costs down of recruitment or doing things quicker, there is an almost immediate compromise in the quality of the people that you're bringing in. And that will not be in every single job. It may not even average out over a short term, but actually over the long term, what you're saying, if we focus on cost, we are not focusing on quality. And that, I think, is a real problem. So the first cultural indicator for me that things are not designed to deliver capability aligned to a long-term plan is that we actually have the wrong drivers in place. And this is where I go back to the second condition, which is the planning piece. If you have planning that looks to a 3-year horizon or a 5-year horizon or whatever, you have a long-term plan, then actually the idea of having a target around time to hire becomes an irrelevance anyway, because what you're able to do is build talent communities. We're going to need lots of digital people at some point in time in the future, because digital is our future as an organization. So you build your talent communities of digital people in advance, so you don't have to frustrate yourself trying to execute really, really quickly. So that's the first thing for me is actually the measures are counterproductive when it comes to recruiting that quality. The second thing for me is managerial attitude within a business. And again, this doesn't apply to everybody, but it will be that the old bell curve. You know, some people have a good attitude towards recruitment and some people have a fairly lousy attitude towards recruitment. Now, most organizations of any scale now have in-house recruitment teams, and there will be attitudes in the managerial community that they serve that will vary from, yes, I see my recruitment partner as a really valued partner who helps my business grow, and they're a fantastic individual and I really trust them, to I'm going to try and get HR out of the process and I will just pick up the phone to my friendly recruitment consultant who I know really, really well, and tries to bypass the process. And now anybody who's worked in recruitment will recognize these scenarios. But within that, there's all sorts of shades of grey. The one that used to frustrate me the most, I've done quite a lot of training of managers in my time on interviewing, and almost inevitably in every single session I have ever held, someone has said at some point in time, oh, I can spot a good candidate within the first couple of minutes, or within the first 5 minutes, or within the first question, or I've got a trick question that I use and this always gets me the best candidates. And these things really frustrate me because they're really indicative of a culture that doesn't say we understand the value in methodical assessment. We understand that choosing someone to meet the long-term objectives of this organization is a complex decision, and they trust gut feel. And that's really, really frustrating. So when you have a managerial population that wants to bypass the processes, that will think that they have the answer, and bizarrely, my experience is the more senior the manager gets, the more they trust to gut instinct rather than to any empirical evidence. And the thing had been, it's a very simple human condition. I didn't get where I was today by making bad recruitment decisions. So therefore, the recruitment decisions I make are good. Therefore, I will continue to trust this gut instinct, this feel I have for someone when they walk into the room. I like to say that managers have amnesia about their bad decisions and absolute crystal clear clarity in memory of their great decisions. Oh, I remember so-and-so I hired. He's now the chief executive of whatever. So I think those things are cultural indicators. You know, when do we get the airtime to talk about new investment? What do the managers say about recruitment behind their backs? What are the measures that are in place? And all these things, if they all point in the wrong direction, what you'll end up with is an execution team that, with all the best will in the world, will be doing really, really good work, but is working in the immediate to fill today's requirements with people who are trying to bypass them in terms of the process. And that, you may be fabulously successful, but are you really recruiting the quality of individual that the organization needs to drive that business plan to the level that it needs to be at? And that's a question that you need to ask yourself. You can be executing brilliantly, but is it really achieving that long-term goal?
Yeah. So my my wife is a marketing director. She's got a team of about 10 people, and she's always saying to me how great our team are. And I say to her, how many people have you fired in the last year? She says, about 10. She's been through so many people. Anyway, sorry, go on.
I'll come on to, because I'm sure you'll have the question. I mean, the greatest irony for me sometimes is I've been a hiring manager, so I've been a head of resourcing and a hiring manager at the same time, because I've been recruiting for my own team. I fall into the same traps. I do exactly the same things sometimes, and you kind of have to have a good look at yourself. And we all know, and when I'm sure we'll want to talk at some stage about how do organisations address this cultural gap. And actually, one of the key things for us is the capability within our own profession. And we have to have a really honest conversation about, do we do ourselves any favors as a profession? And I mean that both from what the external supply chain and the behaviors that we see in that, and also from internal recruiters as well. And that's a question that we need to ask. This is not about line managers doing really horrible things and being terrible people. It's because maybe they do these kind of off beam things because they don't feel they get the support from a recruitment team in any case. So there's complexity in that. So sorry, carry on, Adam. What was your next point?
Well, no, it was like just going back to this the hiring manager trick question. I've got a trick question I ask, and I always get the right person based on that. A mutual friend of ours, Alistair Blair, who used to be my boss, he was in here today in our office, and so he used to be my boss, and he told me, I went in for my interview with him, and the first thing he said was, "Oh, thank God for that. You're the 23rd and final person that I'm seeing for this role." So first of all, I thought, what, 23rd? Why are you interviewing 23 people for this? Anyway, he asked me his trick question, which was, what's your favorite book? You're on a desert island. What book are you going to take? And so I told him I was going to take an atlas and I just told him the truth. There was no trick answer to it. I like looking at where places are and how they relate to each other and stuff like that. And he loved it, and he hired me. Anyway, have you got any good interview questions for recruiters?
I'll tell you the best question that I think a recruiter can ask, in my humble opinion. And it was told to me by someone else, so I didn't invent it, which is when you go through your career, what are you most proud of? And the reason I like that question is because motivation is absolutely critical in determining someone's success in the role. And actually, if someone starts getting excited and talking about something that they're really proud of that is actually relevant to what you're trying to do, that's a pretty good sign. If they're talking about something that was 10 years previous in their career, that's a less good sign. If they're talking about if you're recruiting for a job and what you want is someone just to hold the ship steady, and they talk about a massive change project that really excited them, probably not the right person. So that's the question that I always ask. It's not a trick question. It has some real benefit. The thing that I would say about Alistair, who is also a very successful author, by the way, of course.
Yes, that's right. Author of the history of St. John's Football Club.
St. John's Football Club, yeah. Right. So, I mean, interviewing 23 people is inexcusable. And I'll mention that to Alistair the next time I see him. But also,
he also the job was advertised through a recruitment agency. I saw it and thought, that looks interesting. I'm not going to go for it. And then they advertised directly, and I did go for it. But anyway.
So how long after he hired you did he sack you then?
Oh no, he didn't. He didn't actually. I got hired by the London business of the same company. So that's when I kind of moved there. Anyway, let's talk about this culture thing. Go back to the culture thing. A culture that won't work. how can you spot a culture that's not going to work?
So there are the indicators that I mentioned before. It's all about the goals, the horizon for the planning. A real critical indicator for me is, I've talked briefly about the resourcing mix.
Yeah.
And that is all the strands of resourcing, your internal market, your temporary market, your external market, redeployment, if you have redeployment, executive hiring, talent, early talent acquisition, your graduates, apprentices, senior hiring, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If the whole resourcing mix has a joined up plan and your talent plan moves, if your whole resourcing mix doesn't have a joined up plan, and a joined up plan means a singular owner of that plan. Now, in theory, you could say that that's the HR director's job, but if there isn't a joined up plan there for the whole resourcing mix, then that's problem number one. Then there are all the other factors I talked about. There is also something else, which, and I'm not saying this in a pejorative sense about the individuals, because I know some really, really good individuals who fall into this category. But another indication that the culture doesn't take resourcing entirely seriously is that quite frequent scenario where you have a head of resourcing who is appointed who does not come from a resourcing background. So therefore, it immediately signals that within the HR community, we are not taken as a specialism. You would never get a marketing director appointed from an operational background. You would never get a head of reward appointed who came from a completely different background, but yet you will get a head of recruitment. And so often the head of recruitment is put in place to give them specialist experience because they come from a generalist HR background. That to me is an indicator that the organization doesn't take recruitment as being that deep specialism that is required. And again, we don't do ourselves huge favors in that in the recruitment business. And I also think, the flip side of that is, I've worked with an awful lot of HR directors in my time, and I know an awful lot of people who I worked with, particularly as HR business partners. When I worked for the Royal Bank of Scotland and in Tesco, who have gone on to do bigger jobs somewhere else and become HR directors. Yep. Frighteningly, a number of the graduates I worked with in RBS are now HR directors all over the place, which, good for them. None of them, I've never worked with an HR director. And I'd love someone to say, oh, I know someone who does. I've never worked with an HR director who started off in recruitment. It's incredibly rare to find someone. Oh, I can think of one. Actually, I've just remembered one. But it's incredibly rare to find someone from recruitment who then goes on to be an HR director. We are seen as quite separate. I've often referred to us as the bastard child of HR. We're not entirely loved within the family and seen as that operational thing. So if you can piece together the sense and all that kind of rambling, when that is the case. You have a culture that doesn't value recruitment as much as I think it should. Now, the next question I'll ask it for you, Adam, is why should recruitment be valued? Why should resourcing be valued? Now, this is what we talked about the last time, which is the changing flux of the workplace right now, where people revolve around jobs quicker than absolutely ever. So what we have as organizations in this permanent state of fluidity. And actually, what we talk about in recruitment and resourcing, and this is why the whole part of the plan needs to be joined up, is this recognition that people are only going to stay in jobs for about 2 years, 3 years, absolute max. So what can happen is you can either choose to control what the capability looks like in your organization through having a resourcing mix with a plan, or you can let it happen by happenstance and just see where all the chips land when you let all the different bits go their own way. And I see this as a much more importantly strategic driver within human resources these days than a lot of the issues that I see human resource directors kind of talk to chief executives about, which are all important in their own right. But actually, what could be more important to an organization that says, well, how do we build the capability that we need to deliver our long-term plan?
Yeah. Okay. Let's answer a couple of the. Let's respond to a couple of the points and things on here. So, you've sold a book during the show. Recruiting Animals bought the book.
Thank you.
He wants to know if there will be anything in it for him, as in for a headhunter, as opposed to an internal recruiter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, I know a number of agency staff that have bought the book, and they've come back to me with feedback. I write the book very much from the head of resourcing point of view. And I kind of do it in three ways. And one of that is a fictional story about an imaginary head of resourcing who has imaginary problems. And then the other one is case studies. And then I use my own experience. What they should do for people in the supply chain is maybe have a little bit of insight into what a head of resourcing is thinking about. What are the kind of problems that come across our desk and how we then go about meeting those problems. So, yeah, absolutely. I think it is useful for anyone in the supply chain. And hopefully readable as well. I mean, that's why I did it that way, to make it something that people could read without too much brain strain. Yeah, well, that's another really interesting point, actually, because he's also said maybe he can become a consultant after he reads it because he's going to know the corporate lingo. Now, do you think the language varies considerably from inside to outside in terms of recruiters? Do you think the language and thought processes and all that sort of stuff is like really different? Yes, I think, and I was saying this to a friend of mine the other day, that when I left RBS, all I thought I was capable of doing was working in RBS, because what we had was such a specific way of operating, such a specific language, and you dealt with things. We used to talk about syndication of our ideas, which was the first bit of language that struck me as quite strange. The job is very different. But one of the critical differences between a job externally and internally, and if anyone works externally and wants to make the move internally, I would say this is the number one difference, is externally you're trying to find good candidates. Internally you're trying to find good employees. And that is fundamentally a different thing quite often. A good candidate gets through the door, a good employee delivers goals for an organization. Yeah. And we have to be entirely 100% responsible for that employee. And actually, you walk past the person who you hired them for every single day, or you meet them in the corridor, you meet them in meetings down the line, and therefore that success or failure sticks with you for a long time. Yeah. I think that the language is different, but the whole way of thinking about it is a different beast altogether. So what do you think is what's the best measure? So you talked about there's three measurements of success that we typically measure in talent acquisition or in resourcing. Time to hire, cost per hire, and quality of hire. What's the best method for measuring quality of hire that you have seen? No, I haven't. There's a couple of organizations who have really nice technology that measure the caliber of hire when they come in to an organization. You can do a sense check, 6-12 months down the line as to whether a person is demonstrating the behaviors and meeting the objectives that you set out for them. Like Talentix. The stuff that TALENYTICS.com. Look it up if you don't know it. Yeah, Gavin at Talentix, I think they do really good stuff. The thing I like about it the most is it's incredibly nice for the line manager to use. Because they've got a really user-friendly interface, which you need to have, or no one is going to do that. Yeah. I think, for me, the measure of success is not about does someone pass their probation or does someone hang around for 6 months. Is actually after the training period, after the bedding in period, after the induction, is someone actually delivering in a way that makes sure they're going to hit the objectives as defined by the long-term plan and what that specific role had to play in that long-term plan. And that's the measure of success. And that stuff in Talentix, I mean, there will undoubtedly be other stuff out there that I haven't seen that maybe does it better, but the Talentix stuff, because of the ease of the interface and because of the way it has that 12-month window, I think it's the closest I've got to seeing something that's really good. Yeah. Because one of the problems with cost per hire is an output. And if you start measuring the outputs, then that drives behavior for the inputs. And one of the things that I ran an experiment on in Tesco Bank, and we could do this because recruitment was so incredibly important to us. I joined when there were 350 employees. We took it up to 4,500 or whatever it was. And clearly that growth cycle was critical for the bank. The bank didn't open its doors if we didn't have the people involved. So we managed to kind of experiment with a few things. And one of the things I did was I took away the time to hire and the cost per hire target for everybody. And I measured entirely on candidate experience. And that was the only measure of the recruitment team. Well, of course, I measured everything else. But for the actual recruiters who did the day-to-day dealing with candidates, the only measure they knew was the candidate experience measure.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one.
Yeah, and that worked. Because what that did is the only thing you can control is an input. You can't control the outputs. It's like a football team. You can't control what the final score is, but what you can control is your performance on the pitch. So as long as people were doing the things that had an immediate impact, and that was making sure you dealt with the candidates in a good manner, that I felt would reap the benefits for everything else, and it did. But it's not an easy thing to argue your way around. You have to come from a position of power with that one.
When you were at RBS, was Fred the Shred the CEO?
I have met the man a couple of times, yes.
How much did he dominate culture within the entire business? He's not signed in. I've just checked.
There was a.
Or are you under non-disclosure?
No. There was an expression that people used to use quite a lot called Fred says. So you would quite often get edicts that would come your way that would say, Fred says we have to blah, blah, blah. So whether it was actually Sir Fred dominating the culture or whether it was a management team that used his name to dominate the culture, the effect was the same. There was this kind of view that there was someone who was telling, there was this edict from above, and there were lots and lots of, I'm sure, apocryphal myths about stuff that Fred did. I'm pretty sure he didn't have the time to do because he was doing a pretty big job at the time. So, yeah.
I just imagine being in a meeting and like you turn around and there's gold-plated Fred cutouts standing there looking at you. Anyway.
No,
right.
It wasn't like that at all.
Okay. Suze has said, do you think companies like Skyscanner have set a false culture of easygoing workplaces? So, I think what that question means is, are companies putting together sort of, relaxed kind of environments in order to maybe offset something else?
So I don't know what the culture is like at Skyscanner, though. I know some people who work there. I know Skyscanner are successful and they do good things. I think what you have is competition in the employee proposition. And when you have severe competition in the employee proposition, you have to do innovative and interesting things to make sure that you stand out from the competition. And Skyscanner clearly want to recruit. And in their example, I imagine it's technical people that they're looking for the best technical people going around in the market. So they will try and differentiate themselves in some way. Does that mean that every other organization has to follow them, or does that set a false impression? I'm not sure. It's how they decide to get their competitive example. Yeah. You actually don't have to go back very far in history. I've seen this before when you look at what happened in Silicon Valley back in the .com bubble, where the organizations, they were putting to try and attract the best talent. The working environments became more and more kind of freedom of the individual. I remember reading about some organizations that you bring your pets into work and things like that. You can bring your kids in, you can bring your pets in, you create the home environment as much as possible. So I don't know if they're setting a bar that's going to be difficult for other people, but I completely understand why they would want to create an environment that gives them a competitive edge if that's what it's known for doing. If it isn't known for doing that, I'm not sure what the point would be, but I don't know. Can't speak about them specifically. People I know there are good.
Yeah. Same here. Ian Franklin's commented, this was at the point where you said you've only met one HR director who's come from the recruitment background, and Ian's commented that he's another example. So he has two. there is a theory that HR directors of the near future, far more of them are going to have come from a recruitment background than they have traditionally. Do you think that's going to happen or not?
You would think that it would happen just by weight of numbers. So that there's an evolution in the recruitment industry here where increasingly teams have been built in-house to manage the recruitment away from agencies, of course. So we've seen more and more in-house recruitment teams. And I know an awful lot of the people I've recruited into in-house recruitment teams have then gone on to do other jobs within HR and have broadened their experience. So you would just think that in the future they may have started off working as an administrator in a recruitment team or working as a recruiter, but then gone on to be an HR consultant. And I can actually think of quite a few examples of people that I'd recruited as recruiters who have gone on to do HR BP jobs at a later time. But that does bring us round. You know, we sort of alluded to it at the start about the capability within the profession, and actually how we then move to get a culture. So we talked about what the bad indicators for this resourcing culture are, but what can we do to make sure there is a good culture about resourcing? And I think the first stage in that is for us as a recruitment community, or the recruiters within each individual business, is to establish their credibility as being more than just order takers and deliverers and operators. And that's quite difficult. And I think what does hold us back sometimes is that there is, and again, I'm not having a go at the supply chain and agency suppliers, but an awful lot of agency suppliers have behaved in ways and continue to behave in ways that give the industry a bad reputation. And actually, these are not behaviours that are diminishing hugely. And partially the reason for that is because all the agencies right now will be feeling the strain of increased in-house resourcing, of direct sourcing. So there is more and more activity. So when you have poor behaviours in a very target-driven environment, which is what agencies are, that starts to give the whole industry a bad reputation. Of course, you have the in-house, the agency recruiters quite often become in-house recruiters. So I think the starting point for us in the culture is to establish real credibility in ourselves and in our profession as being something that isn't necessarily easy, that there is when you think about it, a head of resourcing, unlike many other roles, any other role I can think of in HR, you run a marketing department because you've got to generate your candidates. You then run an operations because you've got to manage an influx of hundreds of thousands of candidates. You then run an assessment and selection process, and then you run another process in onboarding. Plus, you manage probably the biggest budget in HR. We run sophisticated, multifaceted businesses.
I agree.
And so therefore, that we have to demonstrate that this can be a strategic lever as opposed to just a turning the handle. And that starts with us, within ourselves and within our teams, having people who demonstrate a partnering strategic capability. And a lot of that is not just taking the order from the manager who says, go and recruit me a Java programmer who can speak fluent Japanese, is actually saying to them, well, why do you need them to be a Java programmer? Why do you need them to speak fluent Japanese? And as opposed to saying, do it right now, it's about doing it right. So there needs to be a bit of pushback, there needs to be capability, there needs to be a bit of strategic partnering that goes on. And that's the starting point for building the culture, which is demonstrating the value that recruitment can add.
Absolutely. I've just been reading a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things by a guy called Ben Horowitz. He's a Silicon Valley venture capital guy now. But one of the things that he said was recruit people for their strengths and don't reject them for their weaknesses, which I think is quite interesting. And I think most recruiters do not do that. And I think most hiring managers also do not do that. Let's talk about outsourcing, because you mentioned it earlier. Now, what sort of impact do you think? I believe that recruitment process outsourcing is an unstoppable force. It's growing like hell, and RPO businesses are absolutely brilliant now. And this time 2 years ago, they weren't, or some of them are brilliant now. What do you think the difference is in terms of, like, from a culture perspective? Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing to outsource recruitment?
I don't think it's either a good thing or a bad thing. It is most definitely a thing, however. I would entirely agree with you. I mean, I think it plays a massive part of the future, quite simply because of the cycles of recruitment that organizations goes through. So you always have, in any kind of recruitment cycle throughout the year, you will always have lulls in your recruitment, where theoretically, if you've built a massive in-house team, you've got them sitting around doing nothing. So there is kind of a de-risking of your recruitment that goes on with the outsourcing. There's also consistency and an ability to target someone to achieve the objective. So I think you're absolutely right in that it is going to continue to be a growth area. One of the problems with it is, to do it right, for an RPO to get things absolutely right, they have to be very, very close to your planning processes, and they have to be engaged with that long-term horizon. Yeah. I would also ask the question of how many of the current RPO organizations are actually focused on recruiting incredible quality for your business, or how many of them are actually in a race to the bottom to save you the most money. If you ask any head of resourcing, why did you implement an RPO? I'm pretty sure the first answer they would give you is it's cheaper than having a team full of people who are sitting around doing nothing half the time. Now, if you actually have your planning processes right, that needn't be the case. So I think RPO are incredibly valuable. They can make a real difference to the organization if you get them embedded enough. But be wary of, and again, it's indicative of what people think about recruitment when the recruitment is outsourced to someone purely on the basis of it being the lowest cost option. That fills me with concern. Now, if there's an RPO that can talk about actually developing quality for your organization, aligning to the long-term business plan, and reducing costs through hiring better people rather than reducing costs through doing better, cheaper recruitment, now that's the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think some of them still are selling themselves on, we're going to be the cheapest way that you can possibly do your recruitment. But there's a few that are candidate ID customers that I know very well. And the one that I probably know best is Cielo Talent. That business is brilliant, and the people in it are brilliant. And their motto for a long time was, we become you. From the very beginning, that's what it was. Their customers do not want them to become them anymore, because they want them to be leading them with technology and innovation and process and new ways of doing things. And they actually don't want them to become them. So they've dropped that we become you, which is very interesting.
That is really interesting, actually.
Yeah. Okay. A few more points and questions and things that we've got. So culture, office environment, or startups that create attractable workspaces. Okay, so Suze, we've kind of covered that one. Animals. So agency recruiter shave to look for companies with a bad recruiting culture to get business. Yeah, sorry. So agency recruiters should look for companies with a bad recruiting culture to get business. Yep, 100%.
Well, I don't know if it's a bad recruiting culture, but the point nonetheless is solid. Where most agencies, so I think there is a long-term future for recruitment agencies, but they have to operate in the right way. I think there's kind of two extremes of the spectrum here, and allow me to go off, because I think it's a good point, but allow me to go off on a slight tangent, and this is my personal view. I think there is the RPO stuff, where actually organizations are really embedded and do lots of the churn recruitment and have a high level of technology, but they also have that human interaction, and they kind of become, with the organization, what we've been talking about. I think absolutely there's a future for that. At the other end of the spectrum, I think there is a real future for what I call Rolodex recruitment, which is really old-fashioned stuff, which is people who are very, very deep vertical specialists in a particular field, where actually the candidates in that market are simply not going to respond to an advert by any organization, because they are what I call lazy job seekers. Now, lazy job seekers doesn't make them bad employees or lazy employees. They just know that there are a few recruitment consultants in their field who will find them their next job, and that's a little community in itself. And they're what I call the Rolodex recruiters. And I think there's the Rolodex recruiters and then the RPO. there's vast swathes of recruitment companies in the middle who rely on, and I don't know if I would call it the bad culture, but who rely on the distress purchase.
Yep.
Which is, Adam has left, I need to replace Adam.
Yeah.
I don't trust my in-house team. And again, that's the capability and perception of in-house recruitment. I don't trust my in-house team to find someone quickly enough. Again, the bad goal comes down to bad timing. So I'll go out to my favorite recruitment consultant who has a good person, and this is the expression I really hate, on their books.
Yeah, I know, like a football player or something like that. Sorry, a football agent.
Yeah, sorry, I was blinded there by the Scottish sun. No, I feel awful closing.
And it's not here in Glasgow.
I feel awful closing the blinds because I haven't seen it in 3 months.
So, comment from we are blessed with the attendance of Europe's #1 sourcing wizard, Iker Jizue, who says, "I believe that both outsourcing and agencies that are focused on improving our recruitment process are on the right track, aiming internal teams that don't have a good enough process. Here is where paying for a consultant can be really, really valuable to guide and implement a best practice, not just to take the money in exchange for candidates." Yes,
listen,
but hardly. Sorry, go on.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. I'm standing up in front of a room full of agency principals and leaders in a couple of months' time, and my message to them will be very much along those lines. If you keep doing what you're doing, which is relying on the distress purchase and not adding any value and just selling a body into people, you're dead in the water in the new world of recruitment. If you do what Iker talks about there, that is really the only future for agencies. They have to add value. They have to tell us stuff we don't know. They have to have access to candidates that we can't get hold of. And they have to take the problem off my desk and make sure that they're recruiting and I don't have one of my recruiters managing them to do the recruitment. So, yes, absolutely.
So a slight tangent, one step away from that, but I think is linked. I personally believe that the worst thing in the entire recruitment world is the concept of contingency recruitment, where there's like 5 different companies are given a brief and it's a race. I think that is the thing that drives almost every bad behavior in recruitment. I'm interested to know what you think about contingency recruitment.
I'm trying to give a balanced view here, and
that's not me being disparaging about the people who do it at all.
No, absolutely not.
It's the actual process. It doesn't.
So I think
quality.
I think it is a throwback to. Sorry, I lost you there, Adam.
It doesn't create good behavior. That's all.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's undoubtedly a throwback to the time when you had recruitment agencies with distinct and separate databases. This was pre-internet recruitment boom, pre-LinkedIn, pre-things like that, where actually for a recruiter, maybe going out to a couple of agencies, you actually felt you were getting distinct databases, that they may have different people in those days on their books. But it's just a behavior that has continued because, of course, what you get now is in a contingent, recruitment brief. All the recruiters go to LinkedIn. They're all looking after the same people. You have the ridiculous concept of your brand being talked about by 3 different recruitment consultants to the same candidate, and then a bun fight over who has candidate ownership and all that kind of nonsense. So the idea of being paid for a result in itself, which is the contingent base of it, I'm not wild about it, but I can actually see why some people would do it. It would rarely be my preferred course of action. But the idea of having 4 or 5 different recruitment consultants fighting over the same candidate, I'm not sure what that achieves anymore. But again, it's those guys who sit in that middle marzipan layer of recruitment who are really going to struggle in the new world.
Yeah,
you know what the marzipan is. It's not the cake. It's not the icing.
Yeah, it's like the Michael Page type of stuff.
I won't mention any brand names specifically.
Yeah, well, when I remember, so when I was a contingency recruiter at the company that's now called Hudson, I believe, now I don't know if this is true, but there was such intense competition between Search and Melville Craig that they would get the job given to them by the employer at the same time.
Yeah.
And they would race to try and block each other's fax machines up so that they could send over the CVs faster than each other. So anyway, there was a lot of fun.
I worked for Melville Craig, and that might have been the search behaviour, Adam, but that certainly wasn't practiced in Melville Craig.
So we've still got comments on these coming in, but we've come to the end of the show, I'm afraid. So John, absolutely loved talking to you again. I still think there's a load of other things that we can cover. So my suggestion is let's reconvene in 2 months or so, if that's good with you. I think there's been about 20 or so people who have logged in today. I'd like to do this again. And hopefully it'll be third time lucky for us getting started on time with our technical issues. But thanks for everybody.
I figured out how to switch off my firewall now, so there we go.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, John, many thanks. I'm honoured that you came and joined us. Thanks for everybody who came and signed in and for all your comments and questions. It's been fun as always. And see you next time. Bye for now.
All right, thanks a lot, Adam. Take care now. Bye.
Cheers, Dan. Bye.